Un, un, un. Oui. Ah, attends, oui. Ok, tout le monde, j'espère que vous avez eu un bon lunch, un bon dîner. Nous allons donc reprendre les sessions. I hope you had a good lunch. So we're going to start again. But before going on to the third panel, Christia wants to tell us a few things.
Merci, Hélène. So first of all, thank you to all of you who've been playing on Nareva. Our experiment is increasingly more successful. We started with the Nareva screens on the side. We had about 30, I think, or 40, I'm looking at Roger, comments. When we flipped it up to the front, we doubled the comments. So I'm expecting doubling the comments for the third panel, and then quadrupling them for my session, of course. But I did want to share a few of the themes that Nico and Mark are in the back sort of seeing in the context of the content that you're sharing. So in no particular order, wholly unscientifically, but this is some of the stuff we're looking at. What is the definition of artificial intelligence, and how can that definition be used for sense making? What are the fears of AI? Uncertainty. Can we predict the future? How can we predict the future in the context of AI? This speaks to agency, I believe. What's the dichotomy between humans and machines? Does it have to be negative? Can be complementary? The whole cultural implications and the landscape of culture in the context of AI development through language, through experiences, through physical infrastructure, etc. Very strong critics of the education system today. The whole issue of traditional learning in this new brave world, and what does that learning look like into the future? AI and beyond AI. What kind of opportunities does AI present to us, both in the education space and beyond, and how interrelated could those be? And are we always looking at AI as a zero-sum game? And then finally, the whole issue of the social nature of AI, the sociability of AI, and how does that play into the context of its development and application in communities and ecosystems generally? Okay. So those are some of the really interesting insights that we're culling from you on Nareva, and we would encourage you to continue to use that. We'll be flipping the screen back on so you can see the actual canvas for panel 3 shortly. And after that, I'll be back with some interesting things to play with. Okay, merci Hélène.
De rien, merci Christia. So before our... yeah, go ahead, Jan. You can go. Before our panelists for the third panel come, we're going to see 3 little video clips from, again, Reddit and Timnit. Again, even if they are not here with us, they have been in our mind, actually, throughout the whole morning. And it's going to be even more powerful this afternoon. So we're going to listen to 3 little clips about AI and inclusion, and then we will have our third panel. Thank you.
Well, so before I started working in AI and more broadly in computer science, I was actually trained as a mathematician. So I did my undergraduate degree in math, and I also did a master's degree in mathematics. And I noticed that in math, it's possible that it's possible that you could have really anyone working on a problem and the product looks the same. It doesn't necessarily matter quite as much who was working on the problem in terms of framing the problem and how they would go about solving it or what impact it might have in the world. But when I moved into computer science, I noticed that there's a lot of degree of freedom in terms of the problems that we could work on and in terms of the impact that they could have. And so that ends up mattering a lot in terms of what questions you end up picking and how your past experiences and how your lived experiences might impact the questions that you pick, and also how you might go about solving them and potentially the impact that they were going to have. So this observation that, that who is the scientist who is actually solving these problems matters so much in the field of AI made me realize the increased importance of having a more diverse and inclusive AI AI community. And so that's why I wanted to both work on increasing the diversity and representation of the field, but also of the field in terms of who's working in the field, but also working in diversity of questions that we're working on, meaning who are we solving these problems for, and what questions do we deem to be important, and how do we go about working on them. So that's why I wanted to work in inclusion and diversity within AI as well.
So oftentimes when I go to these conferences, AI-related conferences, I see very few people of color and, of course, very few women, and just very little diversity in general. So in 2016, when I went to Barcelona for the NIMS conference, I thought there was an estimated number of 8,500 people, but I believe it's closer to 5,000 or 6,000 people, and I counted 6 Black people. And at that time, I had already started a mailing list of every single Black person I could see, and I basically panicked because I knew how fast the field was growing. I knew that there were all of these issues that people were talking about, like automation or autonomous weapons or bias and things like this. And at the same time, the people who are going to be most adversely affected by this were not going to be, were not being given the chance to participate in this, in the creation of this technology. So that was why I wanted to make sure that I spent a big chunk of my time on AI and inclusion. But of course, before that, before AI, I had always worked on trying to, advocate for more diversity, advocate for more social justice and things like this. So this was just an extension into the AI realm. Yes, for sure. So since we started Black in AI, for example, this year there is now new groups called Queer in AI and Latinx in AI. And before Black in AI, there was Women in Machine Learning. So in terms of the inclusion part, of course, there are many people who are who understand that this is just a very homogeneous field, and the tech industry as a whole is a very homogeneous field. And so there are many who are working on it. Rachel Thomas is one, Meg Mitchell, Joy Bolamini. And also when you think about not just inclusion as in diversifying the field, but bias and fairness and transparency, accountability, and understanding how algorithms are impacting people's lives, then of course there's many people working on that. So Solo and Barocas, Moritz Hart is one. They work on just on bias and fairness, and Kate Crawford, Meredith, they have something called AI Now Institute. There's Joy Bolamini, who has the Algorithmic Justice League. And I'm sure I'll forget names because there are so many. They're not all top of mind right now. Latanya Sweeney is one, Meredith Brossard, Safia Umoja Noble, and even Dana works, she has a data and Society Institute. So there are many who are working in this field. It's just that I don't think that so many people connect the issue, both work on the issue of, bias and fairness technically, and also some legal and maybe standardization type issues there, and also connect it to needing to diversify the field as well. There are not so many people actively working on both of those things at the same time.
So good afternoon. How was lunch? Yeah. I'm sorry? Lunch was generated by AI? I'd like to thank everybody for coming once again, and also thanking E21 for organizing, U Ottawa for hosting, and thanking our partners who sponsored students to come. We've got lots of high school students here who are bringing their perspectives, so from the issue of diversity, although maybe we haven't done everything we could have to have perfect representation at the panel, it's nice that we do have students involved. There were students involved in the organization of this from the beginning. We have students from a variety of universities. We have students at the back who are curating Nariva. We have Radimus, who's a student working with another student doing videos. And myself, I am a student. My name is Tyler Burrows. I'm a student here in the Faculty of Education. And I'm very happy and honored and a little nervous to be here to facilitate our panel on diversity. So to start, I think we should hear a quick introduction from each of our three panelists for those of you who didn't join us last night.
Hi, I'm Abhishek Gupta. I'm the founder of the Montreal AI Ethics Institute. I also do AI ethics research at McGill, and I'm a machine learning engineer at Microsoft.
Hello, you've already heard quite a bit from me. I'm Nevena. I'm a senior data scientist at Shopify. And before that, I was doing research in graph theory.
Hi, I'm Stephen Downs. Do we get to do opening things after? Yeah. Okay, good. Because otherwise I was going to do it now. Because I have no respect for authority. Yeah. I work, ironically, I work with the government. I work with the National Research Council of Canada out in the East End, avoid the traffic. And I'm a specialist in online learning, new instructional media, internet, and stuff like that.
So we've already touched on last night and earlier today, we've already touched on ethics and morality a little bit. Autonomous weapons has come up, diversity and inclusion has come up. Our question here is, how might an ethically and morally informed AI be conceived in a culturally diverse global context? And there's a bit more. The first question I had when I looked at this was, whose ethics and whose morality? And so that's a question that came up earlier. So I would like to disrupt this a little bit by giving you each a chance to answer it quickly before we go to the audience. But also I would like you to think about whose ethics and whose morality. I guess we'll start.
Yeah, I can take that. I guess maybe sort of we were discussing that a little bit towards the end of lunch. And I think when we're talking about the ethics or the morality, I think what's important is, and that was brought up in the previous panel as well, or someone I think had raised a question, when we're building these systems, I think what's important is to be culturally and contextually sensitive to where you're deploying those systems, who the target audience for that system is. And what ends up happening is that when we're looking at large platforms, they're sort of, cross-border, they're cross-cultural, and there's maybe one set of dominant set of values and morals, or the structuring of that system that gets imposed on everybody. And I think that's where we need to be a little cautious, where we're tailoring the experience at least a little bit and giving back control to the target audience to have a say in how they experience an automated system. And then there was another point which we can, I guess, touch on as we move along, which was on the idea of stated beliefs versus implicit beliefs, where there are things that people say and profess to, which might be from the perspective of conforming with their group, prevent being ostracized, whereas there are more sort of implicit values and morals that are generally agreed upon within that sort of micro-society, but are maybe not articulated or made explicit.
So I hear a solution and a challenge. The solution is local adaptation for local contexts, but also the challenge of what about what people really think and what's going on in the background that we don't see. How about you?
I think I have a similar take on this. So I do make these models, and I know how actually stupid they are. They just learn from data that we collect. They are a reflection of our society as it is, of what we are thinking, of what we are consuming, of what we are doing, and how we do things. It's just learning from it. And it's also discovering the ugly side of our society, right? It's showing us the downfalls of it. And it's a feedback loop. It's onto us to decide how to use this feedback and what to do with it. Are we going to change it, or are we going to accept it and say, yeah, that's how the things are? I really hope we will change it.
Actually, can I just, before you go on, just one comment, yes, very quickly. There's also, as you said, like while we're building these models, I come from a very applied and practical perspective as well. We're using data that we collect from online sources, and it's important to think about who is behind that data. So who are the people who are voicing themselves to generate that data that's available online, and maybe it itself is already from the get-go not representative, because there are people whose voices are drowned out by a small set of people who are just more vocal online, and that is represented in the data.
Hi, I'm Stephen again. I've got 4 things to say, but I'll keep them very brief, I promise. So first, I want to speak directly to the students here. And they all look up. Because this is about you. There's been a lot of talk about how education needs to change and all of that. You can't wait for the system to change. That has never been true and will never be true. You cannot wait. You have to be the change yourself. I'll give you a simple example. While the morning panels were on, I took notes, organized them thematically, published them in Google Docs, and then shared them and invited comments. What did you do? You see the difference, right? When I was in, well, grade school and high school and university, I literally could not stay awake in a classroom. So Alistair, I really sympathize. Literally, I just, and I see some of you guys like that now, right? You can't just sit there. You can't. You need to be doing something, creating the experience for yourself. If we won't create the experience for you, you have to do it. It's up to you. We can't fix this for you. You have to do it. So, that's point 1. I know, the next point will be more brief. Second point is AI. We're working with very fuzzy definitions of AI here, and some wrong ones, okay? AI is not like programming a computer. It's not about algorithms and rules and procedures. Modern AI, also sometimes called machine learning, is, well, as you said, very trivial and boring. Does 3 things basically. I'm overgeneralizing, but it'll do. Pattern recognition, categorization, and regression or optimization. That's what AI does. Okay, it doesn't create rules. It doesn't create procedures. The making of a decision that comes at the end is at the end of a whole lot of pattern recognition and regression and optimization. The reason why I bring this out is twofold. First of all, it's not about biasing the algorithms. It's always about biasing the data. That's a short-term temporary problem that will go away. And it'll go away because we know about it. But the second thing is, the comment came up a whole bunch about the things that AI can't do, right? But these things that I've just said, pattern recognition, optimization, and categorization, that's how human brains work. AI, contemporary AI, is an effort to mimic the processes of human brains. So when you say creativity and empathy and all of that are things that only humans can do. That is not true. It's literally not true. AI is getting better at precisely the things that we're good at, which is what's really interesting about what they call deep learning. Third point is directly addressing your question. Why do we think we have ethics solved? That's absurd. I did a review of a study by IEEE on ethics, and they're basing it on principles of duty and the benefit of humanity, as defined by, say, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. No country in the world has fully implemented the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Our big problem with AI and ethics is the fear, a genuine fear, that AI might act like we do when it comes to ethics. And it might make the kinds of ethical decisions that we already make. So I think we need to rethink ethics and how we're doing that as a species before we start thinking about ethics in AI. And I'll leave the fourth one.
Thank you. Quick show of hands. How many of you guys think ethics and morality and diversity are important things? Okay, leave your hand up if you think everyone in this room agrees with you about morality and ethics and diversity. So, and I see one of the questions we have up on the board here, and I might start with that one and send it to Abhishek, is a potential clash between universal and culturally specific norms. This is something I was thinking about earlier today when we heard global values. I thought, well, what is a global value? What about someone whose deeply held religious beliefs means that they cannot condone an artificially created intelligence, because for them that is a God's job, not a human's job? How do we reconcile these things?
So I think one of the things that we said post-lunch was that the sort of only, I guess, universal value is self-interest. And that seems to sort of percolate across all cultures, all religions, all geographies and everything else. Because that's, I think sort of rooted inherently in our biology. And how do we reconcile things that, so again, I think that question itself is trying to get at something which maybe is not true, where there isn't a clash between universal and local values, is that, or regional values? What did it say?
They say culturally specific norms.
Yeah, culturally specific norms and universal ones, because that isn't what the clash is. The clash is between those culturally local norms, because when you're looking at a large platform like Facebook as an example, it's not universal values that have been, even values is the wrong word, but a sort of universally consistent structure that's been applied to it. What's happened is that there are folks on the West Coast of the United States who came up with some ideas and they implemented it, and it just so happened to have caught on with the rest of the world. So the clash is between those specific values and the values, let's say, in India or in China or in South Africa. And those are, it's not universality versus local cultural norms. It's local cultural norms against each other. And you know, as I think said in the opening remarks, it's giving power to people to design systems for themselves. And you know, I think Timnit mentioned that, and Radit mentioned that as well. Having these initiatives like the African Masters in Machine Intelligence, those are the kinds of programs we need to encourage, where people are empowered to create systems for themselves, rather than being forced to take on systems that come from one specific part of the world.
Thank you. So now I'd like to throw it out to the audience. We've had one question from the board and a few opening remarks. There must be new questions. And yeah, looks like you.
Comment.
Okay.
I want to say that students are simply not lazy. We have resources, but it's not applied to everyone, like I mentioned before in the morning. Whether our voices are heard, I don't know, but I'm pretty sure we all do want change. It's just that I'm not trying to make excuses here. I'm just trying to state that when we mention the problems within education, a lot of the things in curriculum, I was literally talking about at lunch, it's not what like allows kids to be interested in. Like kids can be interested in programming and still have to take the regular art class they don't want, or kids are interested in art but just don't want to take the math class they didn't want. The curriculum isn't just based on them, and that's how they essentially feel. Literally, even like because our society is so built on competition and competitivity, a lot of the times these students are just built on let's graduate, get a good grade, let's get into university or college, essentially. That's why I feel like the main problem here is the curriculum and how it is based on for students. And they feel like we have to follow this system. We have no say, really. The only say to do it is going to the government and asking them for change. But would it actually happen? It depends, because a lot of changes have happened where we disagreed. Like the one in Toronto where they said that they wanted to change the curriculum on sex education, which was very important. But they decided to change it, to revert it back to the old system, and it's not going to be educating these new kids coming into education to learn what can keep them safe if they were to be participating in these activities, you know?
Thank you. So diversity of learning approaches and interests as well, and then the ethical problems of who gets to decide who learns what about what. Thank you. I see another student, Ms. Radamus, at the back.
I just want to ask a question to the, I'm sorry, I forgot your name, Abby. Yes, because speaking about religion, like I'm a religious person, and it's very complicated and complex when the discussion comes to technology and AI. So how does religion, and in a world that we're living in, we have different religions, inform your work in writing policies that you think that this is ethical, for policy to adjust ethics? So where religion comes from, and how religion or religions in a very diverse, not only in, if we say Christianity, we have totally different understanding of what Christianity means. Same thing goes for Islam and Judaism and other religion. How religion inform and contribute to the policy papers you're writing or your work?
So that's a great question. I think what we're trying to get at is also, again, there is that notion of being sensitive to the context, and why I bring that up again is it depends on where you're talking about religion. So if you're talking about religion in a state that is religious versus a secular state, the way those policies are going to be crafted are going to be different. So in a secular state, you might not want to have religion play a very deep role in the crafting of the policy unless it's specifically targeted for that audience or for that group of people. If it's something that's being, as an example, in a secular state being crafted for the national audience, you maybe don't want religion to play a role in crafting of those policies. That said, I think there are interesting elements from religious discourse that we can incorporate when we're thinking about these policies, and those specifically are more, let's say, word evades me, but they're more, the common elements between all religions, which are things like doing good, doing good onto others, or making sure that lives are not harmed. And I think those sort of principles that are more generalized and that are shared across all religions are ultimately what might inform policy. At least that's what I think.
Did Stephen?
Yeah. My background, for those of you who don't know, is actually in philosophy, so I've looked into this a little bit. I would argue against the proposition that there are shared values across all religions. Empirically, I think that's false. I think for any given value that you can name, particularly if you actually nail down exactly what that value is, you will find exceptions in both the religious and the secular society. And it raises the question for me, it's kind of a meta question, whether we should be talking about ethics in artificial intelligence to begin with, because ethics does tend to be an individual and often a religious question. You know, does it make sense to bring that into the discussion of artificial intelligence? We might not want it in government policy. Why would we want it in artificial intelligence policy? You know, I think that there's a separation between the principles that define, if you will, what is good and what is the good life, and the principles that define how can we all live on the same planet without A, killing each other, and B, destroying the planet. Those are two very separate questions. The first, ethics, principles, morality, religion. The second, just governance, society, consensus. These are actually different kinds of questions. And so I think the fundamental presumption we have here of ethics in AI is something that we ought to question.
May I add? Sure. I think we are trying to put a square peg in a round hole, or whatever the saying is. The diversity, the different cultures and the different religions is what makes this world beautiful. True. So why don't we let every one of these groups decide of what part of these new developing technologies are working for them and what parts are not? Why are we forcing one rule for all? There are universal questions like we all fear of what it may be that new weapons are. I think that we can regulate. I think we would probably all agree on some sort of regulation for it. But things that are beautiful among us, let them flourish and let them naturally develop with the world that's developing on its own.
Thank you. Would anyone like to respond to that or raise a new question? I see a gentleman at the back here with glasses, and then you'll be next.
Thank you. When I was hearing you talking, I was thinking about what if we, instead of talking about potential anticipated clashes between cultural values, if we take an insight at the basis of these values, and I'm talking from a point of view of an educational consultant. Basically, for learners, there is barriers. If you want to be equitable and talk about inclusion, it's the barriers. Whatever, no matter if you come from North Africa, South America, Western Europe, if you are a professional going back to school, you'll experience, of course you'll have some other challenges, but you'll experience basically the same barriers. Like how deal with younger students. And I think if we think about with this frame, it will be easier, and most importantly, it will be easier for teachers to implement the use of artificial intelligence.
So do you think the problem is barriers to people's access to artificial intelligence augmented systems, or are the barriers created by artificial intelligence?
Actually, I'm thinking about artificial intelligence as a tool to help teachers teach and learners learn. This is actually the reason why I'm here in this symposium. So the barriers, of course, it could be also the artificial intelligence, but it's the interaction of the learners with the objects of learning. And I think artificial intelligence could help make this easier experience.
Does anyone have anything they'd like to respond to that? Or is it good as it is?
I don't want learning to be an easier experience, because if it's easy, you're probably not learning. I think that what would help most of all, as was stated earlier, is enabling more agency and more choice and control for learners themselves to pick the topic of their learning and to provide support for the very difficult tasks that topic may entail. And this is especially the case, my fourth point, because we're rapidly approaching, as others have pointed out, the era where there are no jobs, or at least no jobs that we recognize. So the idea that we have a curriculum that we know students are going to need, even the Conference Board of Canada can be wrong about this, I think is absurd. And I think that we should be, at this point, encouraging learners, people generally, but learners, young people in particular, to choose the things that they think is important, to pursue them with the greatest vigor possible, and to provide whatever support we can, understanding that the harder they find the task, the more they're going to learn.
Thank you. And this gentleman up here?
Do you remember how you were talking about how... Is it good? Okay. You were talking about how we can cater this AI to the local group and let them figure out what works for them. Since these technologies are so global and they impact so many people, do you think it's actually able to just to contain a certain system in only a certain area that people agree with?
That's an extremely good point. The distance, for those who were there yesterday, I talked a little bit about the distance, and the distance doesn't exist anymore, at least in a geographical sense, because internet is connecting us all. So yes, this world is global and it's developing in kind of a uniform sense. But why not encourage the individuals to flourish within it, right? I can be in North America, I am in North America now, but I'm finding my way of expressing my work through AI and solving the problems that I'm working on. So can anybody else. And maybe we will come to the same conclusion through different ways or paths of thinking, but that's just a plus for the society.
I was going to look on this side, just because we haven't got anyone over here yet. So this gentleman, but then you, sir, with the glasses, next.
Is one of the... Is it working? Okay.
Not yet. Keep talking.
Testing?
Yep. Yeah, there we go. When we talk about sort of the idea of whether or not there are universal values or not, whether or not, can we incorporate all cultures and other aspects of humanity into AI, are we stuck in sort of the way things are going today, where we think about the breadth that those like Facebook have and Microsoft, and we're thinking of single platform solutions solving all the problems for the entire world? Or can we as humans encourage that diversity by not just sticking with those couple of vendors and look for those unique solutions that meet your particular needs? So let's say Amazon discriminates against women. Okay, well maybe women will go to a different company, help that company excel, potentially take out Amazon, or at least take a big portion. Is there opportunity for some of that differentiation to happen based on the choices that we make?
Isn't there already? But you don't want my opinion. Would someone else like to take this one?
Sure. I guess at a sort of, at a very abstract level, that's happened a little bit with the platforms that you see in China, which are sort of separate. They have an equivalent for everything, but that's tailored to how they, interact with each other, how they, what they see as valuable in their platforms. And now, that's not a real answer to your question, because that's partly happened because of protectionism and the Chinese not allowing external companies to come and deploy, or when they do allow that, they ask for censorship, which these companies are not okay with, and hence they don't go in. So the question, I guess, is that a potential solution where people, put in place protectionism to allow for those things to thrive? Because if in any other context, we haven't really seen that happen, right? I mean, if you look at something like Facebook, that's sort of gone across the entire world, right? And we haven't really seen, let's say, a competitor or a local competitor to it, be it in any part of the world. And the biggest reason I think for that is that it's a network effect problem, right? Where you want to be on it because your friends are on it, and the people that you care about are on it, and that, you know, it sort of just keeps building on itself, and it's hard to maybe fragment once that ball has started rolling. So yeah, I don't really have an answer, but I think at least, you know, just bringing up the point about China and protectionism might spark some more ideas or questions.
So the network effect point is a good one, as is the original question. We have Facebook, right? And Facebook, first of all, has no ethics, and secondly, is worldwide. So I hope I don't get sued for that. I'm sorry, Mark, I didn't mean it.
Do expect a notice on your Facebook account now.
Well, I canceled my Facebook account. It's more than 2 years ago now because I saw where this was headed, and I didn't like it. It was a dark, dark place. But the point about network effects is a really good one. Digital technology allows us to build scale-free networks. Scale-free networks are networks that are not constrained by size. They tend to be artificial networks, conceptual networks like in mathematics, digital networks, as compared to physical networks like rivers or cities or things like that, which are limited by their physical properties. You can have small towns, you can have big cities, but we'll never have a city of 4 billion people. It's just too big to be a city. So when you have something like Facebook benefiting from network effects in a scale-free network, nothing stops it from overwhelming and taking over everything, right? That's the problem. And that's the problem with the platform approach generally. The alternative approach, a decentralized distributed approach, being promoted by people like none other than Tim Berners-Lee with the Solid project, and you know, indie web is a whole phenomenon, is an attempt to counter that, but they're still working in this scale-free environment, which makes it very difficult to succeed. The response would be, okay, let's limit the scale somehow. And that's where we hit issues. In the financial system, limiting the scale would mean putting a cap on your income or a progressive taxation system or something like that to make sure you don't have huge disparities between the poor and the rich. But you see the reaction to that, right? The merest hint of a tax and you hear all the complaints. The same sort of thing with the internet, right? Now, what would work to address the problem of the dominance of platforms like Facebook to create a distributed, decentralized world where people can choose their own technology and in which diversity, which is beautiful, can blossom, is some kind of physical cap. That's not an ethical question, though, right? It's a social, technological question, but unless we answer that question right, and you probably guess how I answer that, the ethical questions don't matter.
And I think one of the other things is with these scale-free networks that you're talking about, the metrics for success are defined as how big can you get?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, the success of Facebook is that it has, what, 1 billion plus people on it? The same thing, when you look at these sky-high valuations, all of them come from people taking pride in the size of their user base, right? Same thing goes for Snapchat, for Instagram. That's how they get their valuations, WhatsApp. And if we might even need to sort of rethink how we incentivize these companies and not placing valuations just on how big your network is.
Yep.
It seems to me the first company that has a really good AI teacher that can personalize learning to some degree across a lot of languages is going to dominate really quickly in the same way that Facebook was able to. And so it's helpful for us to think about, well, how can we have everybody theorizing about ethics and morality before we get to that, the dreaded singularity that's coming down the pipeline.
But the problem of learning isn't a problem of better teaching. That's not the problem.
I'm still student enough to be skeptical on that one. but I promise this gentleman the next question.
Thank you. So I just have a question, because we are talking about ethics in a globally. I think we need to focus maybe on needs, because if I understand from the specialists, we are talking about modeling and helping to solve problems. But the problems in Ottawa are not the same. The problem even in Canada, you'll find that if you move to Africa, it's different. I can give you an example. I don't know if you heard about M-Pesa. It's out of Kenya, because credit cards and banks are not very developed. They develop a mobile app that helps you to buy, to send money, and it works. So what I'm trying to say is, when you talk about diversity, and I think what these two ladies from the US was trying to say, we need to think about others' needs, and they are the better place, to be modeling this and to respond to their need. And then ethically, they would be regulated. So what I'm trying to say is, this is artificial intelligence today has a promise, and to deliver this promise, we do not just need to have these mega multinational solutions, but we need to have local solutions developed by local people to respond to their needs. That's what I was thinking.
It's an excellent point. I don't know if anyone would like to respond to it or react. Would you like to react to his point? Did you have something to add that's directly related?
I really liked your comment.
Yeah.
So as a practitioner, I don't think I understand the problems of the local people, but what I can do is transmit my knowledge, what is reusable of it, to help them solve their own problems. And if I could find a universal way of doing it, I would redo it right away. For now, I'm sticking to my own community and trying to do it within it.
Yeah, I think about that a lot when I think about ethics, because people, again, talk about ethics as a problem that has been solved and then leave large areas of the world with far less than they need. So our current practice of ethics leaves a lot to be desired.
Mattering a lot.
Yeah, I can't address the needs of individual communities personally, because again, I don't understand those needs either. What I would like to see us do, by us I mean the people in this room, the people in this society, is to stop being the problem. I think that's probably where we could help the most. There was a series of events a number of years ago called Live 8, and the whole purpose of that was to dismiss global debt. I think we should do that. I think it would be hard. I think that the 1% that owns half of all money in the world might be inconvenienced by this, but I think we should do it, because that's the source of a lot of the problem. I think we should revisit the ownership of resources, especially the ownership of resources by multinational corporations operating around the world. Again, this is a way in which we are part of the problem. Things like that, I think, again, before somebody talks to me about ethics in AI, we need to address ethics in society, and specifically in our society.
Thank you. How about this student? Because I don't know that we've heard from her yet.
My question is, would the purpose of the AI be to give people the tools to solve their own problems, or for the person that's creating the AI to solve the people's problems?
First one for sure, right? I mean, I don't think there's any doubt in that.
Practically or ideally, the first one for sure?
Both, right? I mean, once you agree on it ideally, I think that's the first step towards trying to do it practically.
But as a society, do you think that's going to happen? Sorry.
I think it's a little bit of both. Your colleague mentioned that we do have these global companies, and the world is kind of being driven in one way by Facebooks, Amazons, Googles of the world, right? But on the other hand, we all individually have to find our space in it, which makes us individually contributing to it.
So I've been through multiple generations of educational technology, and that question comes up every single generation, and it's invariably answered the same way. The problems that are being solved are the problems of, first of all, the company manufacturing the technology, secondly, the university system implementing the technology, and third, the government that is either directly or indirectly paying for the technology. And those are the priorities that are being addressed by educational technology.
Are there any other questions from this side of the room? I feel like we're not hearing very much from over here.
That's because my back's to them.
Yeah.
It is. I feel guilty.
Well, if there's not, we can go back. She's been waiting patiently, but you'll definitely be next, okay?
Sorry. I certainly have to agree that we do have to solve ethically the problems in society before we solve with like AI. A lot of the questions I was going to mention was like from the board. Some countries have very, very limited access to internet. But like, is that the main thing we should worry about? In our own society, we worry about not having internet. Even I myself panic. How will I do my work? How will I do my schoolwork? How will I contact my friends? How will I contact my family members? But essentially in societies where they spent years without internet, they don't worry about that. They worry about water, having clean water. They worry about food. I don't want to attack the person who wrote this, but if you put your mindset to the person who lived a life where they have to maybe walk for 50 kilometers just for water in African, like West Africa, that's a lot of stories where a lot of girls would have to fetch for water. Their worry may be less about limited access to internet. I think we should focus more on technology, on helping them get the water or get the food they need or the resources they need. For instance, there was an invention where there was a water barrel where they, instead of carrying it on their heads, they can roll it as they go instead of having to carry it for long hours on their head. So that's inventions we need to focus on rather than things like internet and iPhones and AIs. Essentially, we should focus on the problems that in that society has created. Not in that society. I mean, like, Western society have a lot to do with these problems in societies where they cannot afford these resources. We should mention that, like, businesses like Coca-Cola have, a lot of food industries have taken a lot from these societies, and I think it's only best if we want to be ethical to pay these countries back and give what they deserve.
Thank you. And I think Alistair gave us a list earlier today of all of the different things where globally we're lacking in equality and access to things. And so the basic needs do need to be addressed. But what about, since it's up on the board a few times, what about the need for internet? Does this seem like a ridiculous thing to consider that everybody needs? Or does everyone have a right to access the internet?
So I'm going to sort of add an anecdote to what the young lady in the second row just said. It's sort of Western solutionism that's applied to the rest of the world, where it's like, okay, everybody needs access to the internet or X, Y, and Z, or whatever, iPhones and AI and whatever else. There was this interesting anecdote where there was a nonprofit that had gone from the U.S. to India to help people with building wells to draw water from the ground in a village. And they went there, they built it, and they saw that nobody was using it. And they were surprised. They said, well, the women of that village had to walk for miles to go to a river to fetch water. Why would they not use the thing that's right there? And the answer was very interesting, because what the women valued was the fact that they had independence from the prying eyes of the rest of the village as they walked to and from the river to go and fetch water. That was their opportunity to socialize. That was their opportunity to discuss issues that they had, which they didn't ever get an opportunity under the prying eyes of the rest of the village. And sometimes there are these sort of social needs, again, that are not necessarily evident to people coming from an outside perspective, and that's why, again, that empowering of local people to create solutions for themselves is very important.
Could AI ever possibly inform an understanding of these types of needs? Going back to the idea of looking at local needs, how could a computer system made anywhere else by anyone else? Is this even possible?
Well, our computer systems are made in China.
Everything is made there.
I think they figured out our needs pretty well.
Okay, we have another student up at the front here.
So we know that we talked about AI and education, but AI is also used in other industries like medicine and military. But if you look at the statistics, the government invests more into the military than education. And I'm not talking about Canada is special, but other countries like Russia, United States, Israel, Germany. And from this perspective, can we look at AI as the weapons of the society? And what does the government value the most?
Any weapons experts?
Oh, I'm not a weapons expert, but yeah, I think that point is well made. And just to put that point in context, and I hope I don't get fired, but it is public knowledge. At NRC, our program area related to AI was called, I think it was Multimedia Advanced Technologies for Security. That was the focus, was AI for security. That's Canada. So yeah, your point is well taken. And a number of researchers were unhappy about that, including the AI expert, Peter Turney, who left NRC as a consequence of that. I'd love to be able to fix that. I'd love to see our work and work in AI generally be for peace and development. How do we make that happen, though?
Neil deGrasse Tyson has a new book about how the military has basically funded all of our scientific progress. So if you're interested in Neil deGrasse Tyson, you might want to look into that book. I think I see Christia waving at me.
Just a really quick question, kind of picks up on some of the content that's being put up here. In your experience, what are the top 3 countries in the world that have actually dealt with or are dealing with AI in a really smart way?
Canada, France, and UK.
Why Canada?
Canada. So what's interesting, and maybe people here already know about it, I was involved earlier last summer in helping to craft an internal policy paper for the Treasury Board Secretariat of Canada, where what they were trying to do was to see how ethical policies could be applied to AI that's used within government services to as the citizens interact with the government. And I had not seen that happen anywhere else in any other government. And it was interesting that the approach that was taken to crafting that document, it started out on, for the government folks in the room, on a platform called GC Collab. And it started off as an iterative document there, but it was quickly made quickly made public on Google Docs, where the person leading it, Michael Carlin, you should look him up. He does fantastic work. He started to invite comments from people from different parts of Canada, and that would have normally not been possible. And it was a great way, and it took a tremendous amount of effort on his part to collate all of those comments, but it ultimately produced a document that was very representative of our Canadian values.
Canada, France, and the UK, do we have a difference of opinion over here?
Not really. I don't think any country has solved any of these issues, but there is greater effort in some countries than others. And I've recently been to London, and there was lots of talk from actually Brussels and some of the initiatives there of trying to regulate certain things or certain aspects of AI. So as long as we understand that maybe some of the traditional institutions, like government, are also becoming software developers. They need to deal with data. They need to handle data. These will, I hope, also push the boundaries of what is regulated and how we approach to it.
Yeah. I'd say Europe, specifically for the implementation recently of GPDR, for the protection of individual and personal data.
So I'm told we have one more, and I've already promised it would be you. So I don't know if someone can pass you a microphone. But for anyone who had a question or comment and they didn't get a chance to say it, of course, there is still Nariva. You can keep putting that up. Twitter and Ideation 6, and we will be looking at this after the fact. So don't be afraid, even if it's the end of the day or tomorrow, keep putting stuff up.
Tweet at us.
Do you think that AI can help us at all to deal with ethical questions through Move 37 events like the kind that were discussed last night?
The question is, can AI answer our ethical problems for us?
Based on, well, not for us, but help us to, based on Move 37 events. In other words, cases where where the AI is able to catch something or come up with something that wouldn't have occurred to us and that we wouldn't have expected it to come up with.
Yeah, I mean, I think I kind of feel that's directed at me since I mentioned it yesterday. But it's definitely a great avenue to unlock new pieces of knowledge that we're not necessarily ever going to arrive at by ourselves. What's I think important is that we capture that and have a mechanism for analyzing that, which is it's sort of an emergent nature of an inherently complex system, and to be able to correctly capture and not discard really outputs that seem like aberrations, but to be able to accept that there are limits to our own knowledge and that there might be, swathes of knowledge that are new coming out of these systems that we start to incorporate. Can it help us answer our ethical questions? I don't know. At least it can give us more perspective. I think that's where it might be helpful.
Anything to add?
No, it kind of brings to the first thing I've said today. It's a feedback loop. It may make more obvious some of the things that are glaring and exist, but we are not aware of them. And then it's up to us what we do with them.
Yeah, my answer's similar. I think probably AI will come up with solutions for some of these ethical dilemmas. For one thing, it'll be sensitive to things that we're not sensitive to. So like the self-driving car problems, right? It looks like 50 of one, half dozen of the other to us, but to an AI, it's like a 51% chance of avoiding an accident versus a 49% chance. It's an obvious decision, right? You go for, but the thing is, AI may come up with these solutions, but very often we won't be able to understand them because it's not using rules or principles or things like that. As you said, it's an emergent thing. which defies understanding as just a simple if-then kind of calculation. Just before I go, I finally figured out why there are dots on the windows, and I put it to you for all, well, for everyone, I guess. Is it a technological issue or an ethical issue that those dots address?
So thank you for that last thought. And
took me all day to figure that out.
Oh.
I just wanted to respond a little bit to that last question, but I think we all need to realize there's no cognitive architecture that's anywhere close to answering an ethical question of any kind. There's no software